Today's, we have a really good speaker joining us. It's Mr. Byron Hurt. Byron Hurt is an award-winning documentary filmmaker, lecturer, published writer, and anti-sexist activist. Hurt is a former host of Emmy-nominated series Real Works with Byron Hurt. His documentary Hip Hop Beyond Beats and Rhymes premiered at the Sundance Film Festival and broadcast on the PBS series Independent Lens. He is also an adjunct professor at Columbia University in the journalism school in the documentary department, a filmmaker in residence at American University, and a consultant for the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation Forward Promise Initiative, a storytelling project for boys and young men of color. The former Northeastern University football quarterback was a founding member of Mentors in Violence Prevention Program, the leading college-based rape and domestic violence prevention initiative for college and professional athletics. Hurt also served as an associate director of the first gender violence prevention program in the United States Marine Corps. Byron's writings have been published in several anthologies, including Michael Eric Dyson's Know What I Mean, Kevin Powell's The Black Male Handbook, and Shira Turan's Men Speak Out. In the media, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the LA Times, O Magazine, Mother Jones, the Chronicle for Higher Education, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Philadelphia Tribune, The Final Call, allhiphop.com, MSNBC, NPR, CNN, Fox News, Access Hollywood, MTV, BET, ABC News, World Tonight, Black Enterprise, C-SPAN, and many other outlets have featured Byron's work. Byron's film, Soul Food Junkies, is critically acclaimed and won the CNN Best Documentary Award, the American Black Film Festival, and Best Documentary at the Urban World Film Festival in New York City. The film premiered nationally on PBS's Emmy award-winning series Independent Lens in 2013. It also broadcast nationally on the cable network TV1 in more than 200 million homes. To learn more about Byron Hurt, go to bhurt.com, find him on Facebook or Twitter at Byron Hurt. So please, folks, help me in welcoming Mr. Byron Hurt to UNK.
I would like to thank Louise for inviting me to be the guest speaker today, and Erica Khan, who was my original contact, who welcomed me as the speaker for tonight. I just want to first begin by saying that this is a very unusual set of circumstances for me. Usually, when I speak to a group of students, I'm usually there in person. I'm very informal. I'm very, I'm very light, and I like to really engage with my students in a very interactive way. So it really hurts me to not be able to be there with you in person. But we're going to do the best we can, and this is a new era. This is a new way forward, and we have to get used to doing things in a very different way. So I appreciate you all for being there, and I hope that that you'll find tonight's conversation interesting and enlightening at the same time. So I want to give a little bit of background about me and who I am for those of you who don't know me, who've never heard about me. My name is Byron, and I am first and foremost a documentary filmmaker. I'm a storyteller, and I love telling stories. I'm also an anti-sexist activist. Now, I did not say an anti-sex activist. I said I am an anti-sexist activist, which simply means that I speak up and out against all forms of physical and sexual violence. And that includes violence against girls and women. It includes violence against boys and men. And it also includes violence against the gay and trans community, the lesbian, gay, and trans community. And so I have spent a considerable amount of time in my adult life first educating myself about gender issues. I started working with a program called the Mentors in Violence Prevention Program, which was founded by a guy named Jackson Katz. And that's why I learned a tremendous amount about the role that boys and men can play in being allies to girls and women and simply speaking out against violence against women. And so I have spent a lot of time traveling around the country, educating folks, talking to both men and women, young boys and girls, about the ways that we can begin to prevent violence against women. And so I've had, incredible experiences. I've learned a lot over the last, several years talking about this issue. And I've incorporated a lot of what I've learned into the stories that I tell. I'm gonna show you one clip from a film that I made several years ago called Hip Hop Beyond Beats and Rhymes. And I'm also going to show you two additional clips from films that I think are very good in terms of creating a catalyst for discussion when it comes to the issue of consent and sexual assault and rape. So I guess I want to begin by saying that, many of you may be on campus for the first time. How many of you are freshmen, incoming freshmen, just by show of hands? Okay, are there sophomores? Okay, any seniors in the room? Okay, so you have a handful of seniors. Okay, so I want the seniors to be really patient with me because a lot of what I'm going to talk about may sound very basic and that you may have heard before. But I think the key thing to remember here is that, a lot of times when, we're forced to sit in these rooms and have conversations about sexual violence or domestic violence, usually that message is being delivered by a woman, typically. Not all of the time, but typically. It's very rare for most people to have a man come and talk to them about, battering, sexual assault, consent, alcohol, things like that. And so I think what I bring to the room is my perspective from a man's perspective and from a heterosexual man's perspective, who really works hard to better understand how I see myself as a man, but then also how I can engage boys and men in a conversation about how we can be better allies and be more supportive to the girls and the women in our lives. So one of the things that I was told that I should really focus in on today is alcohol and consent, or the issue of consent. And so I'm going to do that, and I'm just going to go through a short presentation before I get into showing the clips that I mentioned, just to give you all a real solid sense of consent and what it means and how complicated it can get, but also how simple it can be if we just sort of go into relationships and sexual encounters, with your partners, with an open communication, and developing those communication skills. So the first thing that I want to talk about is just the idea of consent. What is consent, right? So consent means actively agreeing to be sexual with someone, right? And the key word in that sentence is agree, right? You have to agree to have sex with someone in order for it to be consensual. Now, I'm sure a lot of you, for a lot of you, that's like basic, and that's not really any new information, right? But it can get a little bit more complicated. And I want to talk about this because my experience over the years has been that when you talk about consent, most people are in agreement about what that means, right? It means that someone has agreed to participate in sex. But it can become a little bit more complicated if two people are not on the same page, right, in communicating with each other. And then there are other factors that help to complicate the whole idea of consent. So it goes beyond just, agreeing to be sexual with someone, right? You have to consent by letting someone know that sex is actually wanted, right? And sexual activity without consent is considered rape or sexual assault, okay? So there are some key points that I want to talk about before we go into the clips that I've selected. The first one is that consent is freely given. Consenting is a choice that you make without pressure, manipulation, or under the influence of drugs or alcohol. And I want to talk about, the drugs and alcohol piece a little bit because in my experience working with guys talking about this issue, the alcohol and consent topic is probably one of the most contentious topic of them all, because most people are not really fully aware of the laws when it comes to alcohol and consent. Now, I'm not a lawyer, right? But I have some general understanding about how alcohol plays a really big factor in sexual assault cases. And also, it plays a factor in people's understanding about what, when a person is able to consent and when they're not able to consent, right? So the next key point that I want to talk about is that consent is reversible. So in other words, you can change your mind about whether you consent to having sex with a partner whenever you want to, right? That goes for the women in the room and for the men in the room, right? Regardless of the nature of your relationship, whether it's a heterosexual relationship, whether it is a homosexual relationship, whether it's a bisexual, whatever the combination is, everyone has the right to reverse their decision about whether or not they want to have sex. And you should feel free to be able to make that decision without being shamed or guilted. The other thing is that you have to be informed, right? So you can only consent to something if you have the full story. So if someone says that they'll use a condom and then they don't use a condom, halfway into the experience, that's not consent, right? That's manipulation. That's being dishonest, and it's also putting someone at risk in a way that they hadn't agreed to put themselves at risk. So it's important to inform the people, your partners, about whether or not everything is on the up and up, essentially. Another key point is that when it comes to sex, you should only do the kind of things that you want to do, right? Not the things that you're expected to do. That's really important because you should feel good about your sexual relationship, about your sexual partner, and you shouldn't feel like you're being forced to do anything that you are not willing to do or that you do not want to do. And then the other piece is that you have to be specific, right? So saying yes to one thing, like going to the bathroom and to make out, at a party, or going to a bedroom to make out, doesn't mean that you've said yes to other things, right? So if you're a guy and you're in relationship with a woman, you have to make sure that you are getting consent every step of the way, okay? The other things that I think are important to know is that, two parties really need to know what's going on, right? So that means that, as I mentioned earlier, no one should feel as if they're being guilted or shamed or pressured into doing anything, right? That's not a good or healthy sexual partnership, okay? And also, silence does not equal consent. So just because someone doesn't say no, that does not mean that they've provided consent, right? So in most cases, in order for there to be consensual sex, there has to be a yes, right? And it should be a yes and not a no. There's a new movement that's going on right now, or there's a new effort to really change the culture so that people engaging in consensual sex are making affirmative comments about sex, not just saying no, but saying yes, this is what I want to do. I feel comfortable in the situation, et cetera, et cetera. All right. And that's important because a lot of people think that sex is not rape unless there's fighting, screaming, or someone yelling no. And that's not the case. If someone does not feel comfortable in a sexual, experience, they can indicate that they're not comfortable through their body language, and we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. So it's important to know and understand that just because somebody doesn't run out of the room screaming that they've been raped, or they don't hit or grab or pull or push away, before, during, or after sex, that does not mean that a rape has not occurred, right? So body language says a lot. And if you're paying attention, you can determine whether or not somebody is really into it or not, right? Are they leaning in or are they pulling away? Do they look happy or uncomfortable? Are they kissing you back or are they standing still? I mean, so you have to pay attention to these bodily cues in order to know whether or not someone is consenting or not. So consent is a combination of body language and words, right? And I just encourage young people to check in before you go past a certain point so that you're clear about whether or not what you're doing is consent or if it's not consent. All right. So I'm going to take a break for a moment, and I want to show a clip from a film that I've seen a couple of times, and it's called Audrey and Daisy. Has anyone heard of this film, Audrey and Daisy? It's a documentary film. It's on Netflix currently. And it's a very, very powerful film. I'm going to show a clip from that film, and then I'm going to come back and continue having the conversation about consent. Is everybody okay over there? Everybody cool? Everybody good? Okay, cool. Thank you very much. Is anyone familiar with this story? Anyone familiar with this case at all? Okay. So this is a film that is on Netflix, and I had the opportunity to meet Daisy, the young woman who had been raped in that situation. I met her at a film festival, and she talked about her experience after the showing of this film. And she was a very, very nice young woman, but she still seemed like she was traumatized and was really trying to work through what had happened to her. And this film seemed to be cathartic for her, you know, to tell her story. I encourage anybody who's interested in seeing the film further to watch the film. But I chose that clip because it speaks to a few different issues that I want to talk about quickly, and that is alcohol and consent. So, as I mentioned earlier, in my experience working with boys and men on this topic, the issue that freaks guys out the most is the idea that girls and women cannot consent if they have consumed alcohol or if they are intoxicated, right? And so when you think about that, so much about partying and hanging out and, you know, hooking up and having sex with, you know, people in your social circle, or, you know, a boyfriend or someone that you meet at a party, alcohol is always present, right? Or alcohol is present a lot. And I know that, and, you know, I'm sure that you all know that as well. So it's really important to understand when you're putting yourself in a position where you're making yourself vulnerable to be exploited or to be taken advantage of because you're not sober, right? You're drunk, whether you're high, you know, whether you've been drinking alcohol, or whether you're passed out or you blacked out. You lose your ability to consent once you reach that point. And it's important for the guys to know and understand that even if you too are intoxicated or high, you are still responsible for the sexual behavior, for the sexual assault or the rape, if it is proven that you had sex with a woman who was inebriated, who was passed out, or who was high, all right, or on drugs. So it's important to know and understand these things. Now, the other thing that I wanted to talk about very briefly is the idea of being like a proactive bystander. And later on in the film, when you watch the entire film, if you ever get a chance to watch it, you'll see that the group of boys in that situation who were there that night with Maddie B when he took Daisy into the room and slept with her even though she was drunk, they were all sort of in a position to do something about it, and they didn't do anything about it. In fact, they made the situation worse by taking pictures and videotaping the sexual encounter between Maddie and Daisy. And because they did that, and that those photos were shared, and well, actually, that was another case. The photos were not shared, but they were shared with the police. It had a major impact on Daisy's life. The community around her turned against her, and supported or protected the guys in the situation, and left her and her family vulnerable to all sorts of verbal attacks, attacks on her character, attacks on her reputation, everything. And so this all happened because of the issue of not being able to provide consent, and someone taking advantage of someone, of a young girl who was intoxicated. And not only that, but she was underage as well. She was 14 years old. Now, I know that many of you are much older than 14, but the fact is that you may be in situations where you may be hanging out socially, going to parties, which I know may not be the thing that people are doing right now. I don't know what's happening out there in Nebraska because of the pandemic. But, you know, once things start to go back to normal and people are hanging out and partying and socializing, these are things that you have to take into consideration, before you get into a sexual, interaction or a sexual relationship, when you're consuming alcohol or consuming drugs. So I just wanted to share that clip, just to humanize this. I didn't want to just go through a list of points without sort of putting a public face to this issue. I have one more short clip that I want to show. And Louise, do I have time to do that?
Yes, you do.
I do? This is a much shorter clip, but this is from a film called The Hunting Ground. And The Hunting Ground is a film that focuses on sexual assault on college campuses. So I'm going to share my screen once again, and then I'm going to get into this clip. Hopefully I can find it quickly without it being too big of an issue. All right, let's see. Is this it? No, that's not it.
I saw the inside of a courtroom during my second year of law school. It was insanely stressful, but also super rewarding. So yeah, I really loved my second year there.
Okay, you can't see it? Can you not see that?
No.
All right, so I'm going to switch and I'm going to show you my film. All right, I don't think that I'm able to share that on this particular screen share. So I'm going to show you a clip from my film, which deals with consent from a very different issue around sexual assault and inappropriate touching. All right, now this is a film that I made several years ago now. In fact, you will see me in this clip, and I have long dreadlocks and no gray hair. But I want you to focus on the actual content, what's happening at this scene in terms of consent. Are the women in this scene consenting to the behavior that's being exhibited by the guys that they're interacting with on the street?
Back at BET Spring Bling in Daytona Beach, Florida, I ran into this young cat, 18-year-old Jay Hood.
My goal down here is to have fun and get up on some of these girls, man.
You have any problem with like rappers calling women bitches and hoes and stuff like that?
Nah, cause tell you the truth, some of them is bitches, see? You gotta realize that. You got the sisters and then the bitches. Huh? You know? You got the sisters.
So those are the bitches?
Uh-huh.
What makes those the bitches?
Them the bitches, cause you see how they dress. Just look how they dress. Sisters don't dress like that. Huh? Look at that ass. Look. I might go over there and smack it.
I called the women over to see what they had to say about being called bitches and hoes because of what they were wearing.
We are some classy. It's because we want to enjoy the weather and have on some nice shorts and a nice bra. That's just like a penny and bra set. You know what I'm saying?
Do you feel like men sexually objectify you?
That's a man for you, though.
So you don't have a problem with men who objectify you at all? You know what I'm saying?
That's a personal problem with
that focus on your body parts?
That's their opinion. That's their problem.
Dude that we just interviewed said that those women that were walking around here with the bandit suits, whatever, he was saying those women are bitches, those women are hoes. They deserve to be talked to like that. Do you feel that way about like these women right here? You feel like they walking around presenting themselves like they hoes?
Nah, because I'm just, you know, I don't know. I look at it as they're showing off their women features. You got on the uniform. What would be considered as loose? Can we bring her over here?
You want to bring them over here?
Bring her over here. Hey, look.
Yeah. How do y'all feel about images of women in rap music?
Well, if it's not really directed towards you personally. It's just what they say. Sex sells. If you don't take offense to it, then hey. But I know he's not talking to me. I know what I am.
Let's describe a certain female. However, in the view of NWA, a bitch is a bitch. Super cool rich. Man, it was open season on these women. BET Spring Bling looked more like one of their music videos, Gone Wild. The women bought into their roles as scantily clad sex kings, and the men acted out their wildest fantasies, shooting and directing their own hip-hop videos. The guys saw Spring Break weekend as an opportunity to cross the line between flirtation and sexual assault. When you say hi, you want to say hi. Are you the kind that think you're too damn bitch, eat shit and die. Ice Cube coming at you at a crazy bitch. I think a bitch is a bitch.
It's funny when I hear women say, when these rappers are calling, you know, women bitches and hoes, they're not talking about me. It's like, yo, they are talking about you. If George Bush was to get on national TV and make a speech, and he started calling black people niggas, would you be like, I don't know who George Bush is talking about, but he ain't talking about me?
So they coming out here with their ass showing, you know what I'm saying? We gonna slap them on the ass. That's just the way it is, you know what I'm saying? But we represent all these niggas from Jayville, Florida, trying to get on these hoes, slap niggas on the ass, because they representing that fine, salty ass. That's what I'm talking about.
I heard you saying something, if you gonna hit somebody with your pocketbook?
No, I was gonna hit somebody with my fist.
You gonna hit somebody with your fist?
Yes.
Why? What's happening?
Well, I'm being touched and it's unwarranted and unwelcome.
Some people say it's just boys being boys, but I think it has a lot to do with boys figuring out early that girls are there for us to sexually objectify or to be our playthings.
Okay, don't touch your nails. Oh, Jesus. Oh, Lord, this motherfucker off feet.
I've been doing a lot of walking around and videotaping and things like that, and a lot of the women are having a real hard time moving through the crowd.
Yeah, that's one of our biggest problems. As you can see, we're spread kind of thin. We can't be everywhere, so our concern is that somebody's going to be accosted out here and just don't want anybody to get hurt or raped or anything like that.
Have you made any arrests?
Not so far this weekend. It's been good.
Trying to take my whole shirt off.
How y'all do? Shit is entertainment. Word up. If it was so bad like that, Snoop wouldn't even have no fans or nothing. Snoop been talking that bitches ain't shit since the beginning of the time. So they want to hear that. They're the main ones out there listening to the racket call them.
Okay, I'm gonna stop right there. So that was a scene from a film that I made several years ago called Hip Hop Beyond Beats and Rhymes. And the reason why I showed that particular clip is because, one, it shows, it sort of displays the lack of consent that women were providing or not providing in a social environment, in a more sort of an environment that was more exclusive to, you know, black and brown women, as opposed to the first clip that featured a young white woman. But the issues around consent in this particular scene are very complicated, right? Because, you know, the guys who were there at that particular social event viewed the women as, you know, commodities, essentially. They saw them as highly sexualized, you know, bodies that were there for their personal gratification, rather than seeing them as fully human beings and women who were worthy of, you know, respect and dignity, right? And so there were a lot of young women who came out to this social event down in Florida to have a good time. And many of them went home from that particular trip as sexual assault survivors because their bodies had been violated. And again, the one commonality between, you know, the first clip and the second clip is that the behavior of, you know, the sexual assault, and in the first clip, you know, the rape was perpetrated by a male, and in this particular scene, you know, the sexual assault were perpetrated by a group of males, but none of the males were being challenged or questioned about their behavior toward the girls and the women. And that is a recurring theme that we see play out often in social situations where, you know, women are vulnerable to being raped or assaulted, and there's nobody there to like really challenge or to hold the boys and the men accountable. And so that scene really highlights the ways in which girls and women are oftentimes targeted, you know, based on the fact that they're women, right? And that the fact that they are women, you know, gives men this sense of entitlement that they can treat them, you know, whatever way they want to treat them. So